And I'm going to go now to this subsection on page 111. This one's called Excuses for Aggression. Though democracy is often praised as the height of civilization, cooperation, and getting along, it is the exact opposite. Voting is an act of aggression, and loving democracy amounts to loving widespread violence and constant conflict. Political elections are not about togetherness, unity, or tolerance. They are about arguing over how everyone should be forced to behave and what everyone should be forced to financially support via the control machine called government. The abundance of campaign signs littering lawns prior to every election are not the sign of an enlightened, free society. They are the sign of a mentally and physically enslaved society, bickering over which slave master they want holding the whip. Every single person who votes, Democrat, Republican, third party, is attempting to put people into power who will carry out large-scale extortion, taxation, to fund various government programs. Any candidate who suggested doing away with all such robbery entirely, repealing all taxes, would be ridiculed as an extremist kook. All voters attempt to empower a gang that they know will commit mass robbery, yet none of those voters accept any responsibility for doing so. They know what their candidates will do if put into power. They know what the consequences will be to any who then disobey the commands of those politicians. But the belief in authority makes the voters psychologically incapable of recognizing that what they are doing is advocating widespread violence. In fact, notwithstanding the traditional mythology and rhetoric, no one who believes in government actually wants it to be administered with the so-called consent of the governed. If it were actually done via genuine consent, it would mean that each person's political preferences would be imposed only upon himself, unless others happen to advocate the exact same agenda. Obviously, the goal of the voter is not to compel himself to financially support things he likes, nor is it to control his own choices and behaviors. The goal of every voter is always to use the mechanism of government to coerce other people into making certain choices, funding certain things, and behaving in certain ways. Indeed, the individual statist sometimes has a fairly lax view of his own obligation to obey the myriad of political commands, laws, feeling that he is competent to rely on his own common sense and judgment regardless of the law, while at the same time feeling that everyone else needs to be controlled and micromanaged by authority. He believes that he himself is trustworthy and moral, and that can make his own decisions, and that the purpose of law is to keep everyone else in line. The degree to which different voters want authority controlling others varies significantly. The constitutionalist wants the federal government to force others to fund only those things specifically designated as federal matters by the U.S. Constitution. Meanwhile, the progressive wants government to force others to fund all sorts of things, from art, defense, caring for the poor, to education, to retirement programs, and so on. But while the two types of voters differ in the degree and types of aggression they support, they do not differ in principle. They have both accepted the premise that authority has the right to forcibly extort money for government functions that are deemed necessary. They differ only on what counts as necessary. The thinking of almost every statist is paradoxical. On the one hand, statists know that every law they condone is a command backed by a threat of violence. They are fully aware of the things that are done to any lawbreaker who gets caught, but the average statist, when asked, will vehemently deny that he condones the initiation of violence against his neighbors. On a practical level, the statist knows that any political agenda he supports will, if enacted, be administered by whatever level of intimidation or brute force is necessary to obtain compliance from the people. Yet the average statist, while being fully aware of this, will also exhibit a huge logical disconnect, refusing to admit that he is openly and directly advocating the forcible extortion and coercive control of millions of innocent people. The reason for this is that the statist believes that the entity called authority has the right to rule, and as a result, when it commits violence, it does not count as violence. As long as the violence is done by those claiming to be authority, who are imagined to have an exemption from the usual rules of morality, don't steal, don't assault, don't murder, etc., even those who are the most ardent proponents of various taxes and other laws can continue to imagine themselves to be peaceful, compassionate, non-violent people. Some even imagine themselves to be pacifist, because everything government does is done via force or threat of force. There is no such thing and can be no such thing as a statist pacifist. There are many ways, a few of which are addressed below, in which otherwise decent, virtuous people condone aggression and assault, intimidation and robbery, because they believe that it is perfectly allowable for the superhuman, mythical deity known as government to commit such acts, and therefore believe that it is perfectly moral and virtuous for them to ask government to commit such acts.